Welcome to Climate Channel, Climate Conversation, Climate Action Pathways, episode 65. In this 65th episode, we are going to discuss the upcoming 1972 Stockholm Conference Golden Jubilee, coinciding with 50 years of United Nations Environment Program, UNEP plus 50. And also, we are pleased to have during this time UN Assembly, Environmental Assembly, fifth episode. So there are a lot of environmental agendas are going to be unfolding during this time. You know that we all know that after landmark 1972 Stockholm Conference, United Nations Environment Program rolled in. And with United Nations Environment Program, we have seen a lot of changes in the whole world, whole planet on environmental front. Especially couple of protocols, couple of conventions were crafted. And also environment ministries, environmental agendas are unfolding in different countries, in very many countries, in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and also Europe, North America, South America, every corner of the planet. Yes, we have had a lot of milestones in last 50 years on environment, climate change, biodiversity, land, water, ocean front. But a lot of miles we have to go, many more miles we have to go, many more agendas we need to fulfill, realize. And most of the Stockholm Conference aspirations are yet to be realized. Many of the agendas, many of the mandates of UNEP are yet to be realized. So we need to go many more miles. We need to stop environmental degradation all over the world. Air quality improvement, water quality improvement, land quality improvement. Ocean, our oceans are not in good health. So restoration of all these is of paramount importance. Global Environment Outlook, GEO, is a process, flagship of United Nations Environment Program. And we are happy to have with us Barbara Ryan, who has been involved in the GEO process and also involved with UNEP for quite long. Though she is now based in USA, but she was with this process for many months. And we have Tariqul Islam, who has been in Bangladesh UNDP, then went to Iraq, then many other countries, now based in Somalia. So he had also different context from UNDP perspective, especially carrying the mandate of United Nations Environment Program, because he has been looking after environmental portfolio for very many years, for more than 20 years. So he had also a lot of perspective and ground reality, especially country perspectives, because he has served in many countries, from Bangladesh to Iraq, Jordan, I think also Pakistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and now in Somalia, and also in Environment Canada. So he had another perspective, country perspective, or community perspective, local level perspective, and also global perspective, as Barbara Ryan had. So without much ado, I would now like to ask Barbara to initiate the conversation. Barbara Ryan, your reflection.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for this invitation. And it's a pleasure to be with both of you again. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, Komal, and then Tariq, nice to meet you. You know, as I was introduced, while most of my career has been here in the United States, 34 years with the US Geological Survey, I then moved to Geneva, Switzerland, and worked with the World Meteorological Organization for 4 years. Another GEO, the Group on Earth Observations, an intergovernmental organization. And that's where we certainly had strong relationships with UNDP. And then back to the United States in 2018. And I'm now executive director of a not-for-profit organization called WGIC, the World Geospatial Industry Council. You know, I think, you know, throughout our discussion, I'll be able to maybe touch on some things I learned from each of those experiences, but to just kick off and maybe to amplify what you said, we have a long way to go. You know, the Earth is an integrated system. The atmosphere, the oceans, the land, of course, people living on the Earth. And yet, I think many of our institutional organizations are split up according to those domains. We have organizations that only look at the atmosphere or only look at the ocean or only look at the land. And yet the challenges are in fact integrated. So one of the things that I particularly want to see, and I think, actually, I think the convention calls for it, is actually looking at the Earth in an integrated fashion. And so we just need to do a better job of bringing all of our data, scientific findings, and understandings to the challenges that we face. And I'd be happy to go into more detail, but I think that will come out later on in the discussion. So maybe that's a good place to stop right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara, for setting that tone. Tariq, what is your take? What is your ground reality? You have seen from different posts, different position, different countries, how UNEP unfold environmental agendas in very many countries. Environment ministries in different countries, environmental issues, say degradation, different countries had, say, National Environment Conservation Acts, rules, clean air rules, regulations, land rules, regulations, even, say, biodiversity rules, regulations, or plans, climate change action plan, or say biodiversity action plan, or land degradation action plan. So you have been involved in formulation of different countries, these different plans from say sectoral perspective. But as Barbara was mentioning that these are all integrated from land to ocean, from air to land, atmosphere, weather, climate, biodiversity, plants, everything, say Ramsar Convention, Biodiversity Convention, Desertification Convention, Stockholm Convention, Rotterdam Convention, and say there are a lot of Montreal Protocol, say Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, and also say our disaster risk reduction, DRR, Sendai framework. So how best we can integrate all those and also sustainable development, SDGs, 17 SDGs. So how best we can integrate all those? What is your perspective, your take, especially lessons learned over the years?
Thank you, Kamrul Bhai. I think basically, first of all, thanks for inviting me to this, to this your TV show. But more importantly, I must tell you that we have come a long way where we can really reflect on, draw some lessons, and especially when I was working in different countries, especially particularly the vulnerable communities, one thing comes into clear. Basically, if I really start from the now before going back, the three emergencies that we are currently working, the whole world is really suffering: conflict, climate, conflict, and COVID pandemic. If I really start with these 3C, and one thing common among all these, all these drivers that really hit the earth is that it hits the poorest and the vulnerable the most. No matter whichever the emergency or whichever the hazards or shocks that we talk about, kind of things. So at the country level, it's basically the poorest and the marginalized, they are the hardest hit. We managed to really get a long way when it comes to some of the global challenges. I would say that ozone layer is a successful case where I think UNEP was able to really show if there is a global problem, how that problem can be addressed, mobilizing the global community. But we are now talking at a time, basically, when the planet is really sick. We have limited time ahead, very small window where there's a need for actions by the world leaders. Instead of thinking of their own tenure, they better think about the planet's tenure that we have, how to really save the planet within the period of 1 decade in order to really raising the ambitions onto it. And if I really refer back that particular issues to the country level kind of things, I realize that, we are in an interconnected world at the moment. Everything is in connections, or in each of the problems all the problems are interconnected and needs a system-wide thinking and response. At the country level, each of the countries, especially the LDC countries where I had the opportunity to really work for, my immediate response is that each of the country remain very positive in terms of their responses. If there is a global call, then immediately, proactively participate and agree to that global call. They may have, lack of capacity to implement kind of things, and they make commitment without checking with their capacities at hand kind of things. So this is an area where both UNEP and also UNDP is work, especially when it comes to UNEP, has really helped the world, especially when it comes to understanding the problem from the scientific perspectives, and also looking into these transboundary issues. Many of the problems that are transboundary issues that needs a regional approach, UNEP has been very successful onto it, kind of things. And at the country level, if we really talk about actions, yes, we are working together, but also if I really reflect on not us as an UN, but as a government, as well as the people at the country level, I would say that government has made a commitment through a number of multilateral environmental agreement, and they need support, continued support from both UNDP and other UN agencies to really help them meeting those international obligations. They realize that each of the environmental challenges has a global dimensions, and they remain responsive onto it. Couple of things that I would like to really make here, basically through this international process, all United Nations and also the international partners, all international partners are being able to really mobilize the world towards the pathway of decarbonizations, where they understood that, you know, the major challenge of the climate change. And because of the fact that moving the world community together is a kind of an Herculean task, you know, most of the efforts are exhausted in organizing kind of things, then the real challenge to really implement onto it. And at this point, within this, you know, collective process, we may need to really come up in a targeted approach. We know who per capita emissions gives us, where the problem, origin of the problems that needs to be tackled. At the same time, we know the per capita GDP that gives us, and also Human Development Index gives us where the real problems is when it comes to adaptation capacities. So it is important that not being basically competing the arrangement or making the countries to compete each other, it needs to come up with a targeted approach where we can really address the individuals rather than, you know, we have a very good definition, common but differentiated responsibility. But, you know, when it comes to interpretation of that, we need to really take it further to a long way kind of things. The other point I see, especially when it comes to LDC countries, you know, most of the LDCs, you will find that quite a large number of populations are youth. Especially in Somalia, the current one that I'm working is 70% of the people are in that category. So when we really put the countries or put the world into a pathway of transition, it might be important to really see how this, you know, youth can be taken into account, and economic opportunities needs to be taken forward. One thing I used to say that, you know, we put a lot of money on the humanitarian, and that continues to go on kind of things, but we could have really saved or minimized the humanitarian needs if the targeted approach being adopted, and you know, like risk reduction or climate adaptive approach could have been really adopted so that the humanitarian needs can be reduced kind of things, no? So I will stop there, but I'll be more than happy to really take it forward, and whenever there's any specific questions that you may have into the process. In a nutshell, world has done quite a lot. We have identified the problem, and UNEP should be credited for really mobilizing, you know, when it comes to IPCC, and WME is also, UNEP and WME really jointly hand together to really get into this. Science is very clear, but we need to scale up and speed up the actions at the community level, at the national level. And that's the challenge we are facing with. And we don't have much time, frankly speaking. There's no space for taking any complacency that whatever is done is something to celebrate kind of things, unless we are able to really reach to a level where, you know, if 1.5 degrees Celsius is itself a compromise, you know, that the world is now accepting 1.5, but we almost on the verge of losing it, right? This ambition. So we need to really keep this ambition alive, and world community needs to come up. I'm very happy to really make one point, very last point that I want to say. I saw last week, you know, this US Army has adopted climate change strategy. So they were the, you know,
it's also a national security issue. Climate change has a national security dimension.
Yeah, but they are created to fight something, right? Or saving
in fact, US Army has done it, I think, at least 10 years back, but that was altered under.
But they launched something last week. Strategy.
But they are in different climate parlays, as I remember, because I was also invited a couple of times over there in say US Defense, and they also had say long meetings and also strategies back in say 2010, 2012, 2014. So this is not a new one, but this time under Joe Biden, I think things are going to move quite fast, hopefully. Thank you, Dr. Tariq, for your take, especially the challenges ahead. Barbara, you have been involved in Global Environment Outlook. And this is a flagship publication of United Nations Environment Program for many years. I was also involved in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in those years, and also have seen lots of ups and downs within United Nations Environment Program since after creation of it in 1972, especially in 1980s, 90s. I was heavily involved with United Nations Environment Program in its environmental, say, publications and also environment ministerial conferences organized by UNEP in those days. And they have made substantive contribution, especially scientific and also intellectual input they have provided to very many countries, especially policy perspective given, notes given to different countries, executive summaries to different countries, and also creation of environment ministries in different countries. So environment portfolio has been bolstered since then, but still we have to go long way. 50 years is a long journey, but not sufficient. We need to go thousands of miles, longest journey we have to embark on. So in this journey, intellectual input, especially Global Environment Outlook type, IPCC report type, intellectual input or scientific reports are essential because they give us light at the end of the tunnel. So that light are, say, enlightened and kindled by people like you, Barbara. So what is your reflection in that terms? Because intellectually, we have to lead the process. We have to unfold very many policy regimes which are essential to face the daunting challenges, Herculean task, as Tariq was mentioning. Barbara.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you. And I think you're absolutely right that we need solid scientific foundations to take action. And I don't want to overestimate my role in those global environmental outlooks. When we did contribute, it was either when I was in the United States or and I led an organization for a year. The chairmanship rotates, called the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, or CS. And that brings all the space agencies of the world, the national space agencies, together. So we would have had a voice. And with each of those, it's largely been focused on the role of Earth observations, whether it's observations from space, from the ground, or from the ocean, and how we could do a better job of integrating those observations. So it's maybe been a more narrow contribution, and so I want to be clear about that. But I think we certainly have challenges, and for all the wonderful work that scientists and international organizations have done, and the conventions that have existed to get countries together to actually take action, we aren't seeing as much action as we need to see to address the challenges. And that's not to minimize what action has been done. We just need to do more. And honestly, as a scientist, I think we bear some responsibility in this issue. Many times we think we can just do the science and we can kind of throw it over the fence to the policymakers and they'll automatically pick it up because it's such good science, you know, and it's so clear to us what needs to be done. But the truth of the matter is that's not sufficient. We as scientists need to be doing a better job of communicating the risks associated with not taking action. Or we need to do a better job of communicating why there are error bars around some of our data and findings. We don't do a really good job of communicating risk so that young people, the ones that Tariq just talked about, really fundamentally understand what's at stake. So while that may not be a message that my peers as scientists want to hear, I do think we bear some responsibility with this, I would say, general lack of scientific knowledge around the world among just citizens, normal citizens. And so I think that's one point. The other point that I think is important is we really do need to do something, well, we've been calling it hyper partnering. I think that terminology actually maybe came from, an association of investigative journalists, but hyper partnering, that means partnering at the local level, at the regional level, at the international level, and then also down and up through each of those levels. And it takes a lot of time. You know, we're way more comfortable working within our own little circles than to have to spend the time to go outside our circles and interact with other people that might not agree or might approach a problem differently, or actually might be competing for the very same money that we are competing for, you know? And so, so I think in general, we need to increase our partnering across and between organizations. And then lastly, for me, that also includes, and I think all the conventions are slowly moving in this direction, I think we need to start figuring out mechanisms where we can bring the private sector to the solution table in a much more meaningful way. It's clear with all the conventions, the parties are national governments, and rightly so. But that doesn't mean that we ought not to be taking advantage of assets that exist in the private sector. And I'll give just one example, and maybe we can come back and talk about it a little bit later. I had an opportunity, the World Geospatial Industry Council, had an opportunity to participate in a high-level dialogue for space technologies for climate change in the lead up to the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow. It took place 6 months before that, and it was hosted by Nigel Topping, the high-level climate champion for the UK, and also former Vice President Albert Gore here in the United States. He's got an initiative called Climate Trace. So WGIC, the Group on Earth Observations, and Climate Trace looked at what greenhouse gases are being monitored from space and by whom. Clearly, big history, 20 years of work that the public sector was doing to monitor carbon dioxide, methane, or nitrous oxide, those three greenhouse gases that are recognized by the convention. But we, WGIC, brought to the table what the private sector is doing to monitor greenhouse gases from space. Now there are only two companies that are up there monitoring. One, in fact, a Canadian and British company called GHGSat, and another company called Orbital Sidekick. I don't think Orbital Sidekick is delivering data yet. So GHGSat is the only company, private company, delivering greenhouse gas data from space. And yet, as we look at this next decade, there are 14 or 15 more missions that are going to be coming on orbit. They're in development. And what we're seeing is that those public sector agencies do a wonderful job of collecting data all around the Earth, but the private sector is coming in with really localized data, either temporally or spatially or spectrally, more localized. And the combination of those two sets of data is essential. And so a little bit ago, when Tariq was talking about entities actually taking action, what GHGSat is doing is actually working with some polluters and saying, these are the emissions that we're observing from space. Do you want to take some action? Because in many cases, those polluters, they do want to comply with environmental guidance, but they don't have good records. I mean, they think they know what they're emitting, but here's an independent check from space on what their emissions are. And so then those polluters can actually try different methodologies to reduce their emissions. And that, for me, that was a wonderful example of some observations from space that could actually be worked with polluters that will clean up the environment. So for me, the partnership between the public sector and the private sector is essential as we move forward. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara. Your reflection, especially the point you raised now, the involvement of the private sector, role of the private sector. Yes, United Nations Environment Program or Stockholm Conference say delivered say major agenda items or mandates to the national governments. But national governments should also emphasize the role of the private sector, role of the earth, role of the community, role of the stakeholders, especially say research community, universities, for knowledge endowments, for say farmers, fishermen, workers, and others, industrial, say consumers, and also producers, because it's all about consumption and production. Say if we can deduct it at source, say at consumption level and also at production level, then we can have say safe planet Earth, Mother Earth. Because if we can have a say nature-based solution approach, our cultivation, our farming, our production system is say following nature-based solutions. Say if we go to the nature and nature-friendly, environment-friendly oil if we produce, and also our consumption and also our behavior pattern, say waste management, say water use, if from say our school level, primary school to secondary school, even our colleges, universities, students are accustomed with environment-friendly consumption pattern, behavior, that will help habit, change of habit, not luxurious one, very luxurious one. If we have, say, minimum consumption and also keep our production level at a, say, natural oil, that will help keep Not only 1.5 degree temperature rise goal of Paris Agreement alive, but also say degradation of our biodiversity, or say curbing air pollution, land degradation, over extraction of groundwater, and also maintaining the health of the ocean, our water bodies. CFCs, if we can cut back those, that will help keep our Mother Earth quite safe, because we don't have a planet B. We have one planet, one Mother Earth. So we have to protect it, and United Nations Environment Program is for that. And that is the mandate of UNEP. So in next 50 years, we hope, earnestly expect that younger generation will take up it, and we, the scientists, scientific communities led by UNEP, IPCC, WMO, and other institutions, to help them empower with that ideas, with that change of habits, change of behavior in terms of consumption and production in an environment-friendly way. Tariq, your reflection.
No, thank you very much. I think you said it all almost. And also thanks, Barbara, and for your very insightful and some of the things that I didn't know about this, satellite-based private sector monitoring. I thought it is in an environment, intergovernmental arrangement kind of things, but it looks like private sector coming forward. When it comes to private sector, I think it's also encouraging to note that a large number of private sector has recognized climate change is a problem and they need to act on it. And if you read it was a recent study by World Economic Forum, and it came out that almost all private sector, they have started incurring loss due to climate emergencies. They realize that many of their manufacturing raw materials and products are basically exposed to climate threats, and they need to save it. So it's no longer a charity or for them to really support or share some of the profit. They need to save themselves kind of things. So they are on board. And I would like to really refer this point. There are 2 points over there. That is one thing that they're coming forward, but they need to really come forward a little faster. At the same time, there is a risk at the moment if in some of the international private sector entities, because profit is their focus kind of things, So sometimes they are now really assessing the climate risk on their, across their value chains, and identify and changing the geographies and their source materials now moved from most of the vulnerable countries, climate vulnerable countries, to more of a places where climate change is not impacting. So by that way, the poor countries are now becoming again having a challenge. If some of the leading private sector who were basically using product or raw materials from particular source of the poor countries is now being taken out from the other countries kind of thing. So that's inequality, another inequality, a level of inequality will really emerge out of this current process, and world needs to be remain mindful and making sure that how this mitigation and adaptation process really address the issue of equality to the extent possible. We have seen even when it comes to addressing the COVID, world could not really make any headway in terms of achieving the equality kind of things. Those rich countries have their all people vaccinated, while the vaccine penetrations in the poor countries is the lowest kind of things. So that is one thing I think I also remain concerned. But other point I would like to make a very simple point. I think Kamrul will understand that also, Kamrul Bhai, that there are many. Suppose in Bangladesh we have Arong in BRAC, you know, and you purchased cloths from there. And if they add 2% levy in the cloth, that will not change the choice of the people. People will buy it. But that 2% can add up annually 16 crore, meaning that 160 million taka. And that may really help the primary producer who are on the climate vulnerable regions. You know, you can really help them raising their plinth level of their houses, making them climate resilient. So it's basically, you know, there are ways, you know, instead of waiting for some, you know, very credible proposal to be prepared, donors will come forward. There are innovative way to address on it. World is looking forward the fastest way how climate actions can go on, and then it will, the money will automatically flow in over there. You know, we have very limited models. Historically, government across the world, I'm not really making it developed or developing countries, reasonably slow than the private sector, right? And in the least developed countries, private sector is also weak in term comparing to the, you know, developed countries kind of things. And it is not, we should not assume that they will immediately come forward to really tackle the climate challenge. And the responsibility is lying with the government. And the same reasons the government could not really manage to get the economic upliftment of their people, for the same reasons government will also remain, may not be able to really safeguard their climate vulnerable populations, right? There are range of issues over there, and I don't want to really make it a point over there. So that's an areas where UNDP is also trying to really come forward and see how it can be taken forward, what are the issues that we can address. So if you really look into our recent strategic plan, we are focusing on 3 areas. You know, how when it comes to supporting the government, supporting the country, is basically how to build their resilience, how to make sure no one leave behind, and then support them transfer, I think basically structural transformations. Because as Kamrul has mentioned, Kamrul Bhai has already mentioned that, you know, coastal areas, each of these areas are now part of economy. We call it blue economy, green growth, you know, circular economy, waste management. So if you really, instead of tackling the challenges, if you really turn into an opportunity kind of things and make it in the as part of the economic growth, and then tie up the youth, then you are making some transformation, structural transformation at the country level. Because I believe one thing, you know, when it comes to even emergency response, if we're focusing on saving lives, right? But if you can save livelihoods, that will automatically save lives. So I think we should really make that focus very clear upfront kind of things. And in an interconnected world, when it comes to least developed countries, many of the least developed countries are surviving, or their economic backbone became the, you know, remittance comes from the semi-skilled laborers or non-skilled laborers, unskilled laborers. And if even the Western world, or if the Gulf world, they are affected by climate change, meaning that these people are losing their job kind of things. So this is important to understand that how each country are interconnected kind of things, and climate change will impact everyone kind of thing. So it needs a global solutions. It needs to think differently out of the box, how to first decarbonize whatever the sector it is. If there is you know, sometimes when it comes to criminal investigations, or when it comes to any financial investigations, you track the money, right? Here you need to track the carbon, where it is lies, where are the emissions kind of things, and who is emitting onto it, how to really mitigate, and how that can be turned into opportunities. I think thanks to UNEP and also the global community, the whole renewables now in a positions where it can really come as a competitive source, right, of energy. But what happens, what we are seeing that across, you know, Western and also least developed countries, is the subsidy in the conventional energy that remains the major bottlenecks for the renewable to flourish kind of things. and not to really have their equal share onto it, kind of things. So those are political leaders needs to take some bold steps now, in order to really come forward, and solutions are there. I'm hopeful, and we can say a lot of things onto it, but as you have mentioned, most of the things you have already mentioned onto it, but there are many ways. Even when you say it about private sector, let me tell you one other examples, and let me cite examples actually from Bangladesh could be one examples, but many other countries. Like in Dhaka city, which is one of the most vulnerable city, not only for climate change, but also for earthquake. And none of the buildings are constructed by the owners by their own money or saved money. They borrow the money from the bank, and which is the bank provided is Delta BRAC, right? 80% of them, I'm telling you on this thing. If Delta BRAC can have any small unit to ensure that they will not release the fund or they will not grant the mortgage unless the building is designed properly, unless the building design comply with the building codes to safeguard. It's a private sector actions. It doesn't need to wait for government kind of things, So then the whole city is survived, right? We may spend millions of money for developing capacities and other things. You are muted. Kamal bhai, you are muted.
There are laws, even in Bangladesh, for Dhaka cities, there are building codes, but nobody comply that. Even banks are not complying that when they are providing loans to
the call of the private sector to come
builders.
Forward in a more responsive way. That's what I was trying to mention.
Yeah.
And it's not Bangladesh is alone. I'm seeing the same.
Yeah, every country.
In all countries.
Most of the countries, yeah. It is common everywhere. That is why we need to change our behavior, our culture. Say environment-friendly culture should be nurtured, but we are not nurturing that. Though we have environment ministries in different countries, environmental, say, rules, regulations, safeguards, so water body rules, regulations, clean air acts, rules, regulations, but who cares? Most of the time, it is not complied, it is not enforced, it is not monitored right earnestly. That is the crux of the problem. And also implementation. We have lots of plans, documents, laws, regulations, but we are not implementing it properly, enforcing it properly, and also as citizens, we are not complying. Our private sector is also not complying. All these rules, regulations enacted by our parliaments of different countries, sovereign countries. That is the problem. And that challenge we need to face right now, right earnestly, to face this climate emergency or environmental emergency. COVID emergency. So these three emergencies we need to tackle at one go, under one roof, under one, say, framework, through integration. I think, Barbara, it's your turn to share your reflection and your thoughts. Say, how you foresee next 50 years down the lane, say 2050, 2080, and 2100. USA, UK, or say countries like Somalia, Bangladesh, or Maldives, or any Caribbean islands or Pacific islands, Latin American countries, African nations, or Asia Pacific, or say Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Nordic countries, North America, South America. Barbara.
Well, I guess a couple things. It's it's very easy to get discouraged and about the challenges that are facing us, facing the world. It's very easy. And yet, as an eternal optimist, I have to believe that that humans will in fact step up and do what's required when we have to. I'm disappointed that we haven't done more, that we haven't taken action more, and yet you have to maintain hope, because otherwise you would just throw your hands up in the air and walk away, and you can't do that. You know, it was interesting because we talked, you know, when I think it was Tariq, but maybe it was you, Kamarul, that talked about the 3 C's: climate, conflict, and COVID.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about COVID so much, but you know, that
is also
that it showed
part
you
of the solution. Yeah.
Well, and it just showed you how interconnected we are. Yeah. Something that occurs in one part of the world doesn't stay there. We are way too transient, way too mobile, and that's just as humans. You can imagine the air that circles around the earth or the water. We live in a dynamic, integrated earth. And so as I look forward, do I think technology is going to help us? Yes, I do. I don't think that gives humans an excuse not to take any action, because I do think we all are personally responsible. But what we're starting to see, you know, over the last 10 years, at least in the geospatial sector, the geospatial and Earth observation. So those companies for which an organization like WGIC represents. And while this industry, this sector, they aren't the big polluters that are around there, but many of their customers and clients are. And so I think our companies can in fact be messengers to the more polluting industries, that more action can be taken. So that's one thing. What we are seeing emerge is something called digital twins, or the metaverse, you will hear it called, or the mirrored world. While it's been largely the domain of the manufacturing environment, do a digital twin of an automobile to test how it's going to work. We are now seeing those digital twins come into the natural world, and at multiple scales: the scale of this house, the scale of a city, the scale of a state or a country. In fact, there are visions to do one coming out of Europe for the entire planet. As that technology with integrated and open data evolves, I think we will be able to do a better job of modeling the earth and changes on it. And so if people could just get advance warning, almost like we do for wildfires or, you know, tornadoes or floods, if they can get advance warnings for climate change, many will be able to take action. Now, I totally agree, Tariq, with what you're saying, is that much of the world, particularly in those least developed countries, are most susceptible. But if we get any warning where we could move to higher ground, you know, or to get out of the threat of sea level rise, or out of the threat of natural disasters, we just need to do it. I think technology will play a role, but I don't want to say that so that then people will not take individual action, because the responsibility does lie with each of us as individuals.
Thank you very, very much. It was a great pleasure to have you, Barbara and Tariq, at this 65th episode of Climate Conversation at Climate Channel with the Kamrul Chaudhary. I
Kamrul,
would also...
Could I just mention one more thing if you're wrapping up here?
Yeah.
I do want to draw some attention to an event that's going to occur in Canada, because your audience is there also. The GeoIgnite conference is going to be from March 1st and 2nd, and this is Canada's National Geospatial Conference. So this is the biggest conference that Canada hosts for the geospatial and Earth observation industry every year. There'll be workshops the following week, and we, WGAC, will be presenting the results of our GHG, that greenhouse gas monitoring report there, and then also doing a workshop. So I just want to take that opportunity to give a shout out to some of your colleagues in Canada. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Thank you.
Maybe Kamrul Bhai, I can 30 seconds if it is allowed. Because I think when it comes in the run-up to this Stockholm Plus 50 event, what happens, and the world community should remain responsive to that point. UNDP has really mobilized actions to undertake, deep dive consultations, whole of society and whole of government, to really reflect on what they have achieved, kind of things. And in doing so, what we are trying to really bring the NDC, nationally determined contributions. That's the submissions for each of the country. And because there's a need for a stronger buy-in by all sectors, all societies. So we are really putting that as a focus kind of things. I think that's very important, and as an opportunity kind of things, because that will shape the planetary, future of this world kind of things, and so that's the point I wanted to make here on that. Thank you so much for invitation.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have you, Barbara and Tariq, for this climate conversation 65th episode today. And I would also like to recall the great contribution of Maurice Strong, who was a paramount figure in the field of sustainable development and environmental conventions crafting, and also UNEP executive secretaries like Mustafa Tobla, like Klaus Tropfer, my great friend, like Achim Steiner. They have paved the way in last 50 years. Even Ashok Khosla of India, who was not executive director, but as director, played a paramount role over the years, over the decades, in shaping United Nations Environment Program. Even regional directors like, say, people who have presided over in different continents, in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia Pacific region. So today I would like to give a big hand to all of them, because they have shaped not only the GEOs, guiding them, environmental programs in very many years. They are our pathfinders, leaders, and also many scientists, environmentalists of different regions of this planet who have spent their lifetime to promote the cause of environment and sustainable development in our part of the world, in your part of the world, Barbara. So I try to recollect all of them, remember all of them, and our full appreciation for all of them. Yes, they had also a lot of limitations, but at the end of the day, who has not limitations? Everyone has, but they tried to rise to the occasion and tried to deliver in their tenure, in their task. So I had the great opportunity to work with a lot of them in shoulder to shoulder, and hope the next generation of leaders will come and take over for next 50 years. So that we can protect this Mother Earth, one planet. We don't have the luxury of planet B. Thank you very, very much. This episode ends here.